Alexander Zverev explains the reason for his defeat against Alcaraz. The German tennis player analyzed, ahead of the ATP Acapulco, his tough defeat against the world number 1 at the 2026 Australian Open, as well as the main change he has implemented in his game. Alexander Zverev will return to the tour early this morning at the 2026 ATP Acapulco, after not competing since his semi-final loss at the Australian Open to Carlos Alcaraz. Ahead of his match, the German player analyzed the tough defeat against the world number 1 and the changes he is making to take a qualitative leap in his career. In an interview with Tennis TV, Alexander Zverev said he was happy with his performance at the Australian Open despite falling just short of another Grand Slam final in an epic match. He also revealed that since preseason he has been working on being more aggressive on court, something he has focused on during the 3 weeks he has been away from competition and which could be key to winning the first major of his career. I think in Australia I played the right way. I lost the match against Alcaraz because I got tired at the end, to be honest. I had nothing left in the tank at 5-4. I remember on the first point of that game I should have hit the ball much earlier, but to do that you have to move, and I couldn't. Also, there were 2 sets where Carlos had a bit of a physical break because he couldn't move much. Alexander Zverev reveals the changes he has made to his game for 2026. I didn't play anything after the Australian Open. I took some time off and had good training sessions because I want to keep playing a certain way and with a specific style, and that requires a lot of training and adjustments. For me it's a very different game from last year. I'm trying new things. I arrived here several days ago, so I've had time to train and to try to have a good tournament, he admitted. That change in style he refers to is based on not waiting so much for the opponent's mistake, but rather attacking more often to prevent the opponent from controlling the rhythm of the match. I'm playing more aggressively, trying to hit the ball much harder. I'm trying not to win only by being physically better at times, but by dominating matches. That's the main adjustment I made for this year during preseason. I'm trying to stick to that style of play and see what this year brings. Even so, I consider the Australian Open a success, and the plan we have for 2026 seems to be working. I'm happy about that, and we will continue on that path, he concluded. Against Alcaraz, Zverev already showed that he has what it takes to challenge the Spaniard and Jannik Sinner for Grand Slam titles, and early Tuesday morning he will make his debut in Acapulco against an always tricky opponent, Corentin Moutet, as he looks to stay on track and improve on last year's round of 16 loss. Jannik Sinner explained his biggest crisis in the world of tennis. Jannik Sinner surrendered his candidacy earlier than expected at the ATP 500 in Doha. Could Mensik beat him? Yes. But it is still one of the biggest surprises of the tournament. The Italian acknowledged his opponent's high level of serving, accepted specific errors at key moments, and admitted that he was not entirely sharp in certain decisions, although he made it clear that he is not worried about his current level. I made a couple too many mistakes, but that can happen. I'm a bit upset about how I handled some moments, although it's something that can happen. Every player goes through ups and downs. I've had 2 incredible years and now I'm in a small dip, but it's not something that worries me. I know I can play better tennis. In our job we all have ups and downs. With this defeat for Sinner, the ATP 500 Doha trophy seems set up for Carlos Alcaraz, who will have the chance to win a new title and extend his reign at the top of the rankings. The difference between the Spaniard and the Italian is 2,850 points, which could extend to 3,150 points if the world number 1 maintains his streak in Qatar. What's coming in the short term? I know how to come back. I'm very calm. I'm sure the work will pay off, the results will come. Maybe not in Indian Wells or in Miami, but the work will pay off. It's okay. In the medium term? We are working on the physical side. Now we have 2 weeks in which we can train well and fill up the tank for the next tournaments. I'm trying to find a good balance since in Australia I was a bit flat. In this match I tried to push a little more, but here too I have to find the balance. And in the long term? One of my big goals will be Roland Garros, but that goal is still far away. We've seen that all players have suffered throughout their careers, although I wouldn't call this suffering yet. I've simply lost a couple of matches. I also have to remember what I've done in the last 3 years, in which I've won many matches and lost few. The confidence to play good tennis is there. An Italian tennis legend such as Adriano Panatta has called for respect for Jannik Sinner after the large amount of criticism he has received due to his defeat against Djokovic in Australia and, above all, against Mensik in Doha. The former player pointed to Spain as one of the main sources of criticism toward the current world number 2 in the ATP rankings. Known for always expressing his opinion very vehemently, Italian tennis legend Adriano Panatta spoke about Jannik Sinner's current form. Accustomed to excellence in his game, the current world number 2 fell to Novak Djokovic in the semi-finals of the 2026 Australian Open after having won the Oceanic Grand Slam twice in a row. However, the defeat that set off alarm bells was the one against Jakub Mensik in the quarterfinals of the ATP 500 in Doha. For Panatta, that crisis does not exist. It's logical that they are writing this now and they would be happy if it were so, but I'm sorry to contradict them. Jannik is not in crisis at all, Panatta began, referring to the criticism coming from Spain in comments to La Nuova D's and statements reported by Corriere dello Sport. In conclusion, Panatta is clear that the criticism of Jannik Sinner for his last two defeats is unjustified. Someone like Sinner, who is world number one, who has won everything in his career and was almost unbeaten, cannot be criticized like this for two defeats, the former Italian player said about the run of results of the Fox. Wawrinka explains why Carlos Alcaraz and Sinner are better than Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic. The Swiss legend believes that new generations will always be better than the previous ones because the evolution of the game is evident. After making a winning debut in the first round of the ATP Dubai against Benjamin Hassan, 7-5, 6-3, Stan Wawrinka gave an interview to journalist Rima Bulal in which, among other things, he explained why Alcaraz and Sinner are better than Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic. I think the evolution of the game is evident right now. The level is really high, that's for sure. New generations will always be better than the previous ones, and we can see that, the Swiss began. For the three-time Grand Slam champion, the conditions of tennis are increasingly different. The conditions have also changed a bit, with the balls and tournaments being a bit slower, so the style of play is somewhat different. And if you look at the current level of Jannik and Carlos, it's incredibly high, extremely high. And you still have Novak competing with them, he pointed out. In fact, Wawrinka, who is living his final season as a professional, has one last wish before hanging up his racket, to face Alcaraz. I've had the opportunity to play against Jannik many times, the last matches were really tough. And I hope I can play against Carlos at least once before I retire, he concluded. Second tournament of the year and second title for Carlos Alcaraz. The Spaniard added the Doha tournament to his resume after defeating Frenchman Arthur Fils in the final, a victory that also allows him to collect 500 valuable points to consolidate the world number one ranking. The recent Australian Open champion will total 13,550 points this Monday, with a very wide advantage over his closest, and in fact only, pursuer, Jannik Sinner, who after falling in the quarterfinals to Jakub Mensik remains on 10,350. Thus, the Spaniard holds a 3,200 point advantage, a cushion that guarantees him the top spot in the rankings for at least 66 weeks, the same number of weeks Sinner has been in that position. And that is despite the fact that the Italian will add points in every tournament he plays until the Masters 1000 in Rome, because last year he could not compete during that period due to a doping suspension. In any case, even if the Italian collects the maximum possible points until then, he will not be able to catch the Spaniard at least until the start of the clay court season. That means that even if Alcaraz stumbles in the upcoming tournaments, he will remain at the top at least until the end of the Monte Carlo Masters 1000, which concludes on Sunday, April 12, where the Spaniard defends 1,000 points as the reigning champion. After a week's break, Alcaraz and Sinner will experience, from March 4 to 15, a new chapter in their particular fight for the throne of world tennis. It will be in Indian Wells, where the Spaniard defends the 400 points from last year's semi-finals, when he surprisingly fell to eventual champion Jack Draper. For his part, and as already mentioned, Sinner does not defend any points until May due to the doping suspension that kept him off the courts for 3 months, so he will also surely add points at the end of March at the Miami Masters 1000, where Alcaraz defends only the 10 points from the second round reached last year, when he was upset by Belgian David Goffin. After Alcaraz and Sinner, everything remains the same, with Novak Djokovic, 5,280 points, in third place, Alexander Zverev, 4,555, in fourth and Lorenzo Musetti, 4,405, in fifth. The only change in the top 10 is Taylor Fritz's rise to 7th place at the expense of Felix Auger-Aliassime, who drops to 8th. Arthur Fils climbs from number 40 to number 33 thanks to the final he reached in Doha. Jannik Sinner spoke about the scandal of last year's doping suspension before his debut at the Australian Open. Italian Jannik Sinner, the defending champion, said that the 3-month suspension strengthened him and that he arrives in Melbourne more relaxed. Italian Jannik Sinner arrived in Melbourne focused on defending his Australian Open title and spoke openly about the doping episode that marked his 2024. He said that the 3-month suspension strengthened him as a person and that he now approaches tournaments more relaxed on court. The break and the response. In 2024, Sinner was suspended for 3 months after 2 positive tests for an anabolic steroid. The player explained that the substance allegedly entered his system unintentionally during a massage. A physiotherapist applied a spray to treat a cut. That episode forced him to pause his schedule and placed him under intense media pressure. The World Anti-Doping Agency concluded that there was no intention to cheat but considered Sinner responsible for the actions of his team and imposed the suspension. Regarding that moment, the player himself admitted, "It was difficult for me, but also for my family," a phrase that summed up the personal toll he experienced. The suspension expired in May and Jannik Sinner returned to competition with outstanding results. He was crowned champion at Wimbledon and at the ATP Finals, which allowed him to close the season as world number 2, behind Spaniard Carlos Alcaraz. That resurgence confirmed his return to the forefront and eased part of the accumulated pressure.